You know, when you grow up kind of rebuking a core part of yourself, like my spirit, like freaking leaves my body. And so I found substances, alcohol, and then drugs, and they made me feel like I finally belonged and that I had a sense of like, oh, I'm okay.
Super excited to have you on here, Owen. We go a little bit back, like a couple years now. I feel like I've known you for a couple years now. Owen is two-spirited. He is Nehiyaw, who is adopted from Treaty 6 territory, and he was raised in Fort Nelson, British Columbia. Growing up, he felt ashamed of his queer and Indigenous identity, which led him to a battle with addiction. Eventually, having, as he says, one too many near-death experiences, Owen knew he needed to get sober. And he turned to YouTube, and eventually he turned to TikTok to document his journey. Through his digital platforms, Owen started reconnecting with his culture, discovering more and more about his Indigenous and Two-Spirit identity, and he found a community that supported him throughout the process, throughout his shadows, throughout his light. And now with his digital platform, Owen is focused on inspiring Indigenous youth to be proud of their indigeneity and supporting them through sobriety and creating a space of positivity and light. And he's also since reconnected with his biological family. Owen, I feel like you've been on this journey of reclamation, and I can really tell through not only what you share, but also just how you show up in person and how you show up to support the community. Was there anything that I didn't mention that you want listeners to know?
First of all, thank you so much for saying that. I can't think of anything except for unrelated. I was like, am I breathing too hard into this microphone?
It's a little different than TikTok.
Oh, it's so funny that you mentioned that I started with YouTube, because I forget about that sometimes, because it was such a short little period where it just like was not working for me. And if you go back to my YouTube, there's probably like most views was probably like 600 or something on these videos. It was so frustrating to me.
Okay, well, that's better than me, because like I don't even want to mention what I was known on YouTube for. There was a time where one of my videos went viral. I don't know if you know Startle, but it was like this little game you could play online, and it was like you could have like your own digital like girl, like Barbie doll. I filmed my computer on one of those like low like digital cameras, and I was filming it and I was talking over and I was giving away all the cheat codes, and that video went like viral on YouTube to the point where I had to delete it because I was getting harassed on my Stardoll account. So like out of that and you, like, I don't know. I think I would rather the 600 views.
Oh my God, that's so funny. You've come so far from giving Barbie cheat codes out on the internet to now giving like spiritual cheat codes.
I hope so. I mean, I had to live like my Barbie lifestyle somewhere or the other.
Totally.
So you still have your YouTube videos up. So I could go search you and find the ones with 600 views.
Yeah. I think so. So I can't find the one of you?
No, are you kidding me? I erased like every kind of cringy thing on me like before I started advocating more on my platforms. I mean, there's still pretty cringe stuff out there. Like, I'm not going to give the cringy stuff right now because people will probably go look for it, but...
No, people are already searching it up as we speak.
But I think that's a part of our journeys is like, you have to go through the cringe to like feel more confident in who you are.
Totally. Cringe is part of the process. And if you're not looking back and cringing, then you're not growing, I feel.
That comes with it, though. I think that's a part of the learning lessons of like being a content creator, and also getting to like know how to use your voice is like through the beginning stages. Like, you're not just like all of a sudden like a perfect, you know?
And I feel like for me, I literally started from ground zero, and I was like, I don't think that I can do this. And I just saw people who were just already successful at content creating and like speaking and stuff like that. And I was like, hey, I know what I have and I have nothing. But I knew that I like had a voice and that I was meant to start speaking and sharing it. So I was like, I just have to work with what I got and hope it gets better. And it really did over time.
No, I can see the growth like through your page. Like, you can also like, if I've been following you on Instagram for a while. I think what people like can relate to is the authenticity that you bring. Like, it doesn't feel like you're performing, or it doesn't feel like you're trying to be someone that you're not. You're coming in with like, this is who I am, and you can either be here or like block and delete me. Like, I'm not here to
Yeah.
like abide
Or
by
just
your
leave hate
rules.
comments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's always that.
There is a lot that comes with that, I think. But really I want to dive into like where you come from and like where you grew up. Like, where did your story really start from and originate from? Like, where are you from?
I was born in Vernon and I was adopted pretty quickly from my Indigenous family. And I was raised in Fort Nelson, BC, in like a white family in a small conservative town on a farm in a Christian family. And I grew up very separated from my Indigenous identity. And I knew that I was Indigenous growing up. My mom told me, spoke freely with me about the fact that I was Indigenous and that I was adopted. But the way that I saw Natives being portrayed in like the old Western movies that my dad would watch, or the history books that he had, or the way that people in town talked about the Natives in town, or my classmates, just all of this was information for me that like being Native was not a good thing. And so I grew up just like wanting to hide that about myself, not wanting to claim it, wanted to be as far away from the association with that stereotype as possible. You know, when you grow up kind of rebuking a core part of yourself, I don't know, this is just coming like my spirit like freaking leaves my body.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I wasn't in myself and in my body because I was just so ashamed of who I was. Alongside of that, being queer in a conservative religious family, it just, all these things were information for me that it was not okay to be who I was and that I had to be someone else. And so I found substances, alcohol, and then drugs, and they made me feel like I finally belonged and that I had a sense of like, oh, I'm okay. And that was a feeling that I had never felt. And so I just took that and I ran with it. And then, of course, there were other reasons why I was using drugs as well. Like I struggled with disordered eating and had discovered that drugs were like making me skinny. And I was like loving that. And then like I moved to the city with like a full blown coke addiction. And I moved here with the intention to become a professional dancer and a model and just like start my whole gay boy life. And wherever you go, there you are. And there I was in Vancouver, still with an addiction and still with all my problems. And they just kind of, the city kind of just exacerbated them. And I didn't have a place to, well, I just wasn't in the place in my life where I was like ready to heal or even like look at what I was doing. I was just like having fun. And the addiction really like took over because it was the only source of good feelings that I had in my life. And then I didn't get a job and I became homeless off and on for like 6 or 7 years. One of the places that I was staying at for a while in Vancouver became like unsafe for me pretty quickly. And so I actually chose to be on the street rather than be there. And that just continued. And, you know, like it was manageable because I was just doing drugs all the time. And I was like, as long as I have this good feeling, I can like be anywhere. And that lasted for a really long time until I realized that I was just like scraping rock bottom for too long. And I was just getting panic attacks like constantly when I was high. And I was always thinking that I was dying. And I was just wasting my life away, and I knew it because since I was young, I always knew that I had like big potential. I thought that I was going to be Hannah Montana, but it wasn't until I grew up and I was in my addiction for so many years and I was silent about it for so many years, and it was just this huge thing in my life that I realized that recovering from that and sharing that and helping other people who are in the same position is going to be the big thing that I do in my life. And that's what I found in my content creation and in my recovery. And that's kind of my purpose at this point in my life.
Well, thank you for your vulnerability and for your courage on sharing all of that. I know that like people often see on social media maybe a couple versions of ourselves, but they don't know the whole backstory of really what we've gone through to get to where we are. And I just admire that you're picking up the pieces now and you're bringing awareness to like where you are at those points in your life. And also recognizing like you didn't grow up with your biological family. So even just holding space for that must be like such a journey in itself. And it's inspiring to see like your sobriety journey and also your reconnection journey to your biological family is kind of like going hand in hand now. And so like, what made you want to reconnect to your culture and reconnect to your indigeneity?
It's so funny that you say that they go in hand because they really do. Like when I first got sober, I was sober for about 5 months before I start my recovery date because that recovery date was kind of like an awakening for me. So during that 5 months, I started to look at all of these areas of tension in my life and in my memory and things that I just knew were like stones that I had turned over and just like was not ready to pick up. And my Indigenous identity was like a huge spot that I had pushed back here. And I knew it too. And so I was like, in order to become the most healed version of myself, I think I need to know who I am. And that means knowing who I've been and who comes before me. And that way I can know how to move forward and like what I'm supposed to do. But I still wasn't ready to reconnect with my biological family because I grew up with one family and I didn't ever feel like I was missing anything, or in terms of a mom and a dad and a brother and a sister, like I didn't feel like I needed to go find more family. I did feel like something was missing throughout my whole life, but I didn't know what it was until I started reconnecting to culture. And then I was like, oh, that's like a missing piece. So I had thought about reconnecting to my Indigenous identity and how that would be part of my healing. And then I think a couple months into sobriety, my brother called me. We have the same mom, different dads, and adopted into the same family. And he's a bit older than me, so he's always wanted to connect with the biological family because he still has like some memories of them. So he called me one day and he's like, I don't actually remember who it was. It was either my cookum or my or like or like our other brother. I can't remember. But essentially he had just gotten off the phone with one of our family members and he was just so excited about it. And I was like, oh, like that's awesome. And then we got off the phone and within the span of like a week, my biological brother, my other biological brother, my cookum, and my biological mother had reached out to me, just like sending me like Facebook messages and like Instagram messages. And I was like, oh my God, like, I don't know if I'm ready for this because I had known it was something that I needed to address, but I didn't know that if I was ready for it just then. And that was a time when if you left an Instagram message in your like message request for a certain amount of time, it would delete it.
Oh no.
I was like, okay, I have like about 2 weeks to respond to this message. Otherwise it's going away forever. And I waited until like the last couple days and I just like responded. Yeah, I wasn't ready, but I got ready. And it is so beautiful the way that it has gone hand in hand with my sobriety because it's like all like healing my addiction and the root of my addiction and like my family trauma and it's like this like upward spiral like mixing of healing. And I went to Treaty 6 territory where my cookum and most of my cousins and everything live, and I met them that following summer, and I've just been on that reconnecting journey ever since, and like going away to meet them or to see them for holidays and going away to ceremony with them in the summer. And that's where I'm at now, just learning and connecting.
Well, and I can imagine like through your sobriety journey and through your reconnection journey, like when you are healing, you really have to go back to those roots. And so it's kind of interesting to know that like the thing you were afraid of like doing was probably the very thing that you needed to bring forth the healing that was required for like your next step. So it's kind of
exactly
interesting. Like the things we resist are usually like what we may need to heal.
Yeah, I think like addressing it head on is the thing that it's a block. Whatever it is, it's a block for us to move into like the next stage, the next level. And addressing it head on is the only thing that's going to get you through that and into the next phase where you're meant to be or where I feel I'm meant to be.
I can relate to your story in a way of like my survival mechanisms and coping mechanisms is through disassociation. Like I've had that ever since I was a child. Like I also grew up in a predominantly white community. I went to a Catholic school when I was younger. I experienced being the only Indigenous girl within a class, and I really suppressed that side until I like got to be a little bit older. And so like I don't know, like disassociating from like our indigeneity as a way to survive. But then if you think about it, like that's also what our ancestors sometimes did. Like my Métis side would just talk about their French identity and they wouldn't talk about being Métis because that was just a way of their survival. And so it's funny how these things are kind of like generational, where it's like, oh, we're also disassociating because we feel like we might just need this to survive. So like this is something I'm just uncovering right now as we're speaking.
Yeah. Holy.
So
just really reconnecting to the ancestors
literally.
And their coping mechanisms.
But I think also speaking about it and like bringing life to it is also gonna like destigmatize it and like make other people feel like they're not alone. And I think oftentimes when you are battling addiction, it can be an incredibly isolating experience. My brother has gone through his own episodes of addiction, and during those processes, it's really hard to see someone you really love and not know exactly what they need or how to support them, because you also don't want to be in a place to like police them or to like tell them what they should be doing. And so for those that are dealing with a family member that maybe dealing with addiction, like what would your advice be on like how we can support maybe members of the community or our family members that may be facing their own addictions?
That's such a good question. And that's so hard. Like, I can only imagine what my friends and my family had to deal with me in addiction. And there have been times when I, quote unquote, received help from people who were, quote unquote, well-intentioned, and it was just more harmful for me. And it was enabling, or it was them trying to control me or scare me or coerce me out of like doing this thing. But what would have helped me, I think, and what has helped me, I have some friends who've shown me this kind of treatment, is just being a presence there. I don't often, for me, like I didn't often need anything except for sometimes like, yeah, just like emotional support. I think it depends on what this person says that their needs are. If you have a family member or a loved one struggling with addiction and you're like, how can I best show up to support them? I think that question is best directed at them. And, you know, if they come back and hit you with, oh, well, I need $500, you have to understand what your boundaries are and what you're willing to give in like a humanitarian type way, which I feel is like giving without expecting anything in return. And the support that you give also should not have strings attached. Like, I'm going to feed you, but like, you need to be doing what I think you need to be doing. You need to be seeking help right now. You need to whatever. Like, sometimes people are just not ready. And the best way that we can help them is just support them in like gentle ways where they're at, not trying to get them to be somewhere where we need them to be.
I think it's like unconditional love. Like I think
That part.
for me, like personally, I had a really big moment like with my brother where like full transparency, like my brother, he also spent some time on East Hastings. Like he was missing for like 3 days. I had to like go on social media, post about like he's missing and can't find like, and we had to go down to Hastings and like look for him for like what felt like an eternity. And he had been living with me at the time when I was living in Squatch Eyes Lodge. But I remember like at that point I had gave him so much that I had nothing left to give anymore, to the point where I was losing sight of like my own self. Like I didn't have the capacity to care for another person in the way that I had been used to, because I had been in that state of like trying to give him so much that it really came down to like an ultimatum. I was like, hey, you're either gonna go to this like rehab and like detox center right now, or you're going back to Alberta. Like I can't have you live with me anymore. And I think for him, like that was a really big wake up call, and like, oh my gosh, like my sister's not gonna be there in the same way that she was. And I think that's what makes it really challenging, is like you love someone so much, but you also need that love for yourself. And it's like, at what capacity can we keep giving until like there's nothing left. And so I think, yeah, what you're saying, like stating, like asking the person what they need, and then like for me, I guess maybe giving choices too. I think maybe that eased the situation. Like he had two choices, but yeah, it's interesting because addiction just manifests in so many different ways that you don't know even what that person's going through.
I think that was a good example of you like understanding where your boundary was and sticking within it. And yeah, giving them an option. Because like, hey, like this is as much as I can give, and here's that information. You do what you are willing to do with that. But I've done everything that I can.
Totally.
And it's so hard when it's somebody that we love, because oftentimes, yeah, you have to take a step back and you have to like stop giving them the things that they're asking for. Because like for me, when I'm in addiction, like my world revolves around me. Like I'm just taking energetically, whatever. I'm just like kind of sucking it all in, and it's all revolving around me. And if people continue to give me the things that I ask for or whatever, then like it'll never end.
Right.
Eventually you have to like cut off that energetic tie and just be like, okay, this is this person's journey and I need to take a step back. And whenever they're ready, if they're ever ready, then I will still be here. But if you keep that energetic cord going forever, that relationship is probably going to be freaking fried by the end of whenever they're ready to come back around. I think the best way, yeah, sometimes is to take a step back so that relationship is still intact when they're ready.
Yeah, either the relationship will be fried or it'll be like super codependent, where it's like you're almost like in need of each other at that point. For parents struggling with like kids with addictions, it would be so hard for me to like put boundaries up with your kids. I think that would be really challenging. But for you personally, like I know now you have come into a place where you have like more boundaries, you're taking care of your self-care. And like where did that really, like where was that shift for you? I know you had mentioned like you did relapse, but like where was that shift for you when you're like, okay, you know, I've had enough of this lifestyle, like I've had enough of my stuff. Like what shifted for you? When did that happen?
So I've had multiple like large shifts in my life, and I think when I start my recovery date from, which is like just over like 2 years ago in like the beginning of April or something. You know what's funny? Actually thinking back, that was like right around when you first started following me. I remember because I had like gone through my like near-death experience. So that was like an awakening moment for me. And then I came back to Vancouver after spending like a week in the mental hospital in Nanaimo. And I was like, okay, like I need to make some changes. And then I think only like a couple days later, there was an anti-trans rally or something happening. And then there was like a counter protest. And so like I went there. I posted a picture of it and somebody shared that. Somebody that you follow shared that. And then I think like you followed me from that. And so it's funny that like you also came in like at the very like beginning of like that awakening. But yeah, so that time specifically, I just have to tell you.
I'm like, at this point, you have to.
So just prefacing this by saying that I had not slept in 5 days. After you reach 3 days of not sleeping, you're like in a state of psychosis, sleep deprivation. It does weird things to your brain. So I was on the ferry from Nanaimo to Vancouver, and I became convinced from the voices in my head that this ship was going to crash into another ship that I saw coming. And it is up to me to save everyone on board. And because I'm getting these like, I'm like, this is my intuition. This is my Pisces power. I'm like, this is so crazy. People are going to be like, wow, this was just nuts. And I had like just watched Aquaman like a couple weeks before. So I was like, oh, I'm like a chosen Pisces with hidden Aquaman powers, and it's my responsibility to turn this boat around. So I wrapped myself in this rope and I jumped off of the ship. And as soon as I like hit the water, I'm being dragged underneath the water from this rope. And so my pants fall around my ankles, but I'm still wearing my shoes. So like my legs are like stuck. And as soon as I like am underwater getting pulled, I realize that my powers aren't turning on. And I fucked up.
You're like, wait, I'm the one that needs saving.
So the rope slips out of my like body and my fingers, and the ship is sailing off, and I'm screaming. But luckily there was a girl. It was like I was on the passenger, like not the passenger deck, the deck with all the trucks and the cars or whatever. And there was a girl in the car with her friends, and it looked like they were playing like a board game or something. There was just like a few of them, and I saw them, and then I like wrapped the rope around my body, and then I looked back, and she was actually standing outside of the car, and she like had walked partly up to me, and she's like, "Hey, like, I don't think that's safe." And I was just like, "Girl, you have no idea. Okay, like I'm about to save all of you." But I didn't say this. This is in my head. I'm like, "Girl, like, I don't know. I have time for this. I need to save this whole ship." And then I just like jumped off. So she saw me jump off. And if that girl's listening, honestly, I'm so sorry for traumatizing you that way. Thank you, though. You saved my life, and I would love to meet you and like buy you lunch or something.
Literally.
She saved my life. Like, what can I do for her?
So she saw. So then she like reported.
She saw. I think she reported, but in the meantime, I'm like in the water, and I'm like, I wonder how long it's going to take for me to die. I wonder if I just like let go right now, if I sink, I wonder if it's going to hurt if I drown. And I think I should probably just get it over with now. And then I was like, no, I can't like not fight as hard as I can. And I remember just panicking and panicking. And then I was like, if I'm going to get out of this is like a quicksand situation. The more you struggle, the quicker you're going to go down. And I need to like switch it up right now. And so I started just practicing gratitude. And I was like, I am grateful for my friends. And I started listing out on my friends. I'm like, I'm grateful that I'm safe. I'm grateful for all of these things. And I just like, I swear I like jumped timelines from like literally about to die to like some timeline that was where I lived. And then I remembered that I had heard a podcast with Oprah years and years ago, and she was talking to this woman who swam from like continent to continent across an entire ocean. And I was like, okay, if she can do that, then I can swim to shore. I know it's humanly possible. And then, yeah, I started like swimming on my back. And then eventually I saw like searchlights, and I was like, like they're looking for me. Okay, all I have to do now is like stay afloat. All I have to do now is like not give up, and then they'll find me. Yeah, so I started, well, I had been swimming back to shore, but then I was like, oh, I'm actually going in the opposite direction. I need to turn around. So I like turn around to swim to them, like on my back. And then I just came up with this mantra that was like helping me like with each backstroke. I was just chanting like, I believe in the power of magic. And I don't know where that came from. It's just like what came out. And then eventually they like pulled me out of the like a speedboat, and they came and they found me and they pulled me out of the water. And I was just like screaming because I was just in such distress and shock and like panic, just like wailing. And they brought me back on board and then brought me back to Nanaimo and put me in the mental hospital for a week because, of course, they thought that I tried to kill myself. But I'm like, no, you guys, I was trying to save everyone. It was my duty.
That's wild. This is my first time hearing this story, by the way, for all of you listening. Like, I'm like, wow, like how did you not bring this up when we first met? Because this would be low key like my breaking story if that was me. The power of that mantra and the power to like just casually like, oh, I'm swimming the wrong way. Let me turn it around here and like,
yeah.
I believe in magic.
I was like, I believe in the power of magic. Yeah. So like, it's so funny because obviously like we're Pisces, we're very drawn to water. We like love that shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like kind of traumatized by it, but I still like if I'm like out in open water just swimming, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like right back there.
Well, and I've heard like near-death experiences oftentimes bring a lot of clarity for the people that experience them. And it also brings like a lot of gratitude that they start living their lives very differently after the near-death experience. And some also say like sometimes they're like psychic gifts or like other stuff starts coming on. So it's always made me like really intrigued to like hear about people's near-death experiences. Not to say that I want to go through one, knock on wood. But I imagine it would like bring a new sense of life almost to it because you're like, wow, I actually survived that and I still have so much more life to live. And so did you start living your life in a different way, obviously, since that experience, or like, how was that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything I stand in front of you today as is a direct result of like that experience. Like it brought an awakening for me, and it started me like living my life in a different way, taking care of myself in a different way. It awakened my purpose and my drive, and that potential that I knew that I had when I was like younger. It was kind of like in a locked box, and that experience gave me the key to unlock it and the permission to unlock it, because I was like, if this happens again, what, like, how much further can I go? Honestly. Yeah, it was what I needed in order for me to like scare me into actually living in alignment with who I'm meant to be.
Well, and I think like living in alignment often comes with, yeah, first an awakening, but then an awareness of like how you're living your everyday life. Like, I think for me, something that I have a challenge with is like ensuring I'm disciplined enough to continuously living in alignment with like quote unquote my higher self or like my authentic self. And so like what does living in alignment with you look like on a day-to-day basis? Like how do you stay committed to your sobriety journey? And like I know like it comes with like a roller coaster of probably emotions and it's like not perfect. So like what do your everyday like rituals or routines look like for you staying connected in that alignment?
I'm kind of an inconsistent queen. Like I'm doing like so good for like a month, and then for some reason I just like fall off, and then I don't know, it takes a while to get back to it. But there are practices that I come back to all the time. The most constant one is meditation. I set intentions regularly. I communicate regularly to whatever higher powers there are, whatever spiritual powers like my ancestors and spirit guides. Like I just communicate regularly to all the things outside of myself. And that also includes nature. Like I go out and I talk to nature, like in my head and in my,
You were talking to a bear the other day. I was like, yo, you are way too close. Like,
it just was so, it looked so cuddly. I don't know what else to say.
well, and I was reading an article before we got on this call about you, and it was saying how before you make your content for TikTok, that you asked to just like have creators speak through you, or you connect to your guides before you create content. And so, like, what would your advice be for Indigenous youth that are wanting to become a content creator or wanting to share their story? Like, what are ways that Indigenous youth can maybe start creating their own content, and like what would your advice be there?
I would say that a great tip that I got after I had already started, if you want to start creating content, just share what you're already doing. Don't go like out of your way to like share stuff that isn't genuine to what you're doing. If you like already are like funny, or if you're already like doing athletic stuff, or if you're already like making art, like just share that. I feel like you're most successful when you're sharing yourself genuinely. I attach my purpose to sharing like all of my struggles and stuff. And I understand like not everyone is like that, but I'm still doing what is like the most genuine to me. And I just feel like doing what feels genuine to you. Also, like if there's something that you want to say it. If there's something that you want to see, be it.
Yeah, be the change that you want to see in the world. One thing I've also had to come back to through being a content creator is coming back to that purpose you'd mentioned, but also coming back to like, how do I feel when I'm creating this content? And also, like, if I'm creating through what I feel is connected to my heart and connected to my spirit, then it doesn't matter what other people are saying. But I know you had mentioned earlier, like, there's comments out there that are not the most supportive. Like, there's a lot of trolls online. There can be a lot of hate towards being Indigenous, being Two-Spirit. Like, how do you deal with that feedback? Like, how do you make sure you're still connected to your truth and your power despite maybe the trolls that you have online? Like, how do you deal with like trolls and like hate online?
I think it's so funny. And then I also think it's sad. But either way, it doesn't really affect the way that I feel about myself because I know who I am and I love who I am and I know what my values are and what my morals are. And when I'm acting from a place of my values and purpose, then I'm very strong and I'm very rooted. And like the things people have to say don't really even apply to me. They have nothing to do with me. It's literally like I see it in real time. I'm like, they say something mean and I'm like, that's literally an in real time reflection of what's going on inside of you. And it has nothing to do with me. I understand what my responsibility is, what my role is, and taking on all of that is not it. I'm just here to share my
Yeah.
stuff. I'm here for the self exploration and the healing and just like spreading that outward. Yeah.
I love how authentic you are. You're like, you're not scared to post like whatever you want to post on your platform. You just do it anyway. And I think like you inspire people just through that level of like not confidence, but also just like, yeah, I guess confidence in like who you are, who Owen is. And I think also people are changing like every single day. So like what you may like what I posted on that start out account is no longer resonates with me anymore. So like can we allow people to like change and adapt with like and evolve?
Totally. That's so funny. I really wish that there was a recording of that.
Well, when we do think of like the digital timeline that we're in, like it is like almost like also an artificial timeline, but there's also this concept of like Indigenous futurism and like imagining a new future for us as Indigenous people. And so when you think of Indigenous futurism, like what do you hope to see within like the rest of 2023 or like within the next few years? Like what does Indigenous futurism look like to you?
I think the idea of Indigenous futurism for me means going back like into the past and remembering our traditional and our ancestral wisdom and bringing that forward with us into the future and into the work that we do. I think across all sectors, like politics, entertainment, wellness, just everything you can think of. It's like, for me, like a resurgence of the values because, I mean, we are in like a Western society, yes, but I think that there's a way that we can like bring Indigenous values systems into this like future and into this modern day that is going to change everything because right now our society is very centered around self and consuming and self, and like our like Indigenous cultures across the world have like known that it's not just about us, it's about a balance, about reciprocity, about like giving and receiving. And I think like bringing those values back into society is going to balance things out. Yeah, just like as a two-spirit person, like walking, I feel like I really take seriously that I like walk between two worlds. And I feel that in like many ways, like, you know, growing up quote unquote white, but being Indigenous, and like I'm like the intersection between those, and also like the male and female spirit, like the masculine and feminine spirit. And also this is stuff that I'm like just thinking about, like verbal processing. Actually, it's like not a fully formed idea, but
I get what you're saying. Yeah, like a resurgence of Indigenous values, even though we're living within a Western society for the most part, there's still ways to incorporate that, whether that be like reconnecting to the land or like land sovereignty or like creating your own like garden or like even just giving back to your community and thinking less of just yourself and like what you have to profit off of things. And I love that you mentioned like your two-spirit identity. And that was something that I also wanted you to ask you about is like, what does being two-spirit mean to you? Because I know there's also like a lot of difference of opinion when it comes to like what exactly that means and how it looks like for everyone. So like what does being two-spirit, how do you define what two-spirit is?
so for me, I remember hearing about two-spirit people prior to like even connecting to my Indigenous culture. And I thought that they were always like trans individuals because the ones that I saw just seemed very like physically like trans identifying. And so I knew like, oh, that could never, I guess like I'm not two spirit. I would never be two spirit because I don't look a certain way. But through my reconnection process, I realized that And through seeing other Two-Spirit people, I realized that like the way that you present on the outside is only one aspect of being Two-Spirit. And for me, I take very seriously the spiritual aspect, the role aspect. Like we have specific like roles in our communities and in our relationships. And that is what I identify the most with, knowing like I am a healer and like knowing that if I had existed back then, I would have been I mean, I don't know. I don't like to talk about myself, but like I would have been like a ceremonial leader, healer, like Two-Spirit bad bitch. And now I just am like reimagining what that would look like. And it's so funny to me that I'm like, that this is what I have found my purpose in. And it just makes so much sense because like I'm Two-Spirit. This idea of like walking between both worlds, masculine and the feminine, and the colonial and Indigenous. And also, I was born at the last 10 minutes of Pisces season. So I'm like, and Pisces is like the oldest sign in the zodiac. So I'm like right between the oldest and the youngest, like the beginning and the end. I'm like I'm on the line of everything, I feel. And I want to be the one that like brings it together and like bridges that gap.
Well, I think like Two-Spirit people are that, like when we're talking about resurgence and reclamation of Indigenous values within Western like society, now that I think about it, like when you think of Western society, it's often dominated by this patriarchal dominance. Like it's also very focused on the left brain. And if you look at our brain, like we have a masculine and a feminine side to even the left and right hemispheres of our brain. So if we're only operating from the left hemisphere of our brain, the patriarchal, logical, analytical one, then it's like, how can we start to bring in that rebalance of that feminine aspect and of that right side of the brain that is connected to the moon, that's connected to our intuition? And so if you think about it, Two-Spirit people really have the formula to start like rebalancing and healing humans, like just like human beings and society in general, because we have been operating just on the one side.
Okay, the way that I just got chills, because that just like it just feels right to me. And like I know that to be true. And I just feel like I have the capacity to do both, like the logical and then the emotional, and I like put it forward like with love.
Well, and it's interconnected too, because I think also if we try to define like what masculinity is and femininity is, then isn't that like getting back into binary thinking? So like at the end of the day, it's kind of all like interconnected. I don't know. This is also just me thinking out loud here. Two Pisces on a podcast. This is what you're going to get.
Just swimming around the waters. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Owen, for like sharing parts of your journey and parts of your story. I had no idea you had that near-death experience. That is a story that I am going to continuously like listen to and reflect on and probably bring up when I meet you in person again.
Yeah.
But for those of the listeners that are wanting to support your journey, where can they find you? What are you up to in the next year? Yeah, how can listeners support you?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Owen.Unruh. Oh, I mean, speaking of this, I was going to say I'd love to be on more reality television. Speaking of this, congratulations
on
Amazing Race. Woo! Yeah, but I hope to one day be on Big Brother. I don't normally speak my goals out loud, but I'm at the point where I'm just like, you know what?
Gotta manifest
like I gotta
it.
start I gotta manifest it.
For any producers listening, Owen on the next season of Big Brother, let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. And or also just any other reality TV where I can showcase myself and what I represent.
We're going to reflect on this episode when you are on a reality TV show, because it's going to
happen. That's what I was thinking too. I'm like, I'm going to mention it and then we're going to throw back to this.
Throwback, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, hi, for listening to the show. If you like the podcast, check your podcast app now to make sure you're subscribed. I'm Shayla Oulette Stonechild. You can find me along with more info on Matriarch Movement on Instagram at Shayla0H. And my podcast producer is Kattie Laur, and I'll talk to you again soon.